Well, welcome everybody. My name is Doug Mitchell. I have the great privilege of serving as the executive director of the Glacier National Park Conservancy. And tonight is one of my very favorite nights of the year when we get to hear from park leaders about a little in-depth behind the screen, if you will, look on some of the projects that we are, because of your support, people from around the country supporting the Glacier Conservancy, are able to support for 2025. This is a year that we're breaking records again. We have committed to the park to raise $4.1 million to fund some 48 projects all across the park. Park projects that include protecting the wilderness, engaging people in discovering the wonder of the park, and in looking after the wildlife that makes the park such a special place to visit. So thanks for joining us tonight. We will have three presentations. We're just really lucky to have an incredible group of people. We have Lisa Bate and Gabby Eaton, who are going to talk to us about some bat research that they've been doing. Lisa's also been involved in a lot of our other projects. So feel free to ask Lisa all sorts of questions. Kate McHugh is going to lead us off talking about wilderness work that she's been leading. And Jean Tabert, on one of my favorite subjects, you'll notice my background is a picture of Franklin Roosevelt on the Going to the Sun Highway 90 years ago this August. The history of the park, both the cultural and natural history of the park. So thanks to all of you for joining us. We all have various states of internet health here in the Flathead Valley, so we may have to be nimble as we go forward. Thanks in advance for your patience. But again, we're going to start with Kate McHugh, who is the Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River Coordinator. And Kate became a legend to me even before she started here. We learned that there was going to be a new wilderness person. We've been working really hard with Pete Webster, the acting superintendent at the time, to really create a more robust wilderness support program. And he'd said, we're really lucky that we've gotten this person, Kate McHugh, to join us. She's had a very distinguished career, including most recently at the Grand Canyon. And Julie and I were hiking in the Grand Canyon, and everywhere I went, when people learned I was from Glacier, they said, "You got Kate McHugh." So, Kate, thank you very much for not only joining us tonight, but joining us here in Glacier. And we're super excited to hear about your leadership and our partnership in wilderness management and protection in Glacier Park. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Doug, for the kind intro. And good evening, everyone. My name is Kate McHugh. I am the first presenter to go, so there'll be some learning with slide viewing. So Andrew, thank you for advancing slides for me. I'd be happy to let you know when we're ready for the next one. So again, my name is Kate McHugh. I'm the Glacier Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River Coordinator. I've been at Glacier for just over 1 year, and I'm learning fast. I traded out the desert for the mountains, and I'm learning most notably about rain and grizzly bears, but I'm getting better. I have a master's degree in wilderness management and was a graduate fellow in Joshua Tree National Park. And at Grand Canyon, I worked as a wilderness law enforcement ranger for a decade. Tonight, I'm here to share about the Glacier Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River Program and thank the Conservancy staff, board, and members for their enduring support. I'm very fortunate to walk into a program with so much momentum and support. So go ahead, next slide. So take a look at these photos. Do any of these glacier photos resonate with you? And why is that? Maybe it's because you enjoy listening to the wind waves on the lakeshore, or because you value an ecological safe haven for diverse species. Or maybe it's because your family has picked huckleberries along the trail since before you can remember. Or perhaps it's simply because you enjoy an adventure. Next slide. So wilderness can be a tough concept because it's a holistic idea that's comprised of these three things. First is biophysical environments that are primarily free from modern human manipulation and impact. Second is personal experiences in natural environments that are relatively free from the encumbrances and signs of modern society. And third is the symbolic meanings of humility, restraint, and interdependence that inspire human connection with nature. So the way we manage wilderness is by managing for these intangible qualities. Next slide. Great. So to start, I'd like to share about the Glacier Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River program. First, the people, and then the important work we do. Next slide. It's a lot of words on the screen. You don't have to read them, but I lead the Glacier Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River program at the top of that org chart. And I have a growing and talented staff of around 18 rangers and 60 volunteers that work on everything from monitoring wilderness character to maintaining wilderness campgrounds to protecting park resources. Next. This list is a snapshot of the work done in our program. The wilderness staff and volunteers perform these tasks across nearly 1 million acres of recommended wilderness in Glacier National Park. We reach outside the boundaries of Glacier too and engage with other agencies, park stakeholders, and community members to promote wilderness stewardship. Next. So for the 2026 Glacier National Park Conservancy grant cycle, we've designed a different ask, and we are looking for assistance funding 3 levels of the wilderness program. One is wilderness leadership that helps pay for my position, which is largely leadership in wilderness stewardship, environmental compliance for wild and scenic rivers and wilderness, and program management and development. I'm working on partnerships as well with other agencies and local communities to integrate them into our operations. The second component is wilderness supervision. This is a new position that supports managing 10 to 14 wilderness rangers, everything from hiring to training to supporting those staff. The third piece is wilderness operations, and that is the meat and potatoes of wilderness operations. And those are lead wilderness rangers and wilderness rangers across all districts of the park that do everything from open campgrounds for the season to patrol for bear closures. So this new model is a request for funding where we're building a strategic foundation for a growing program rather than funding individual projects. The idea of this approach is that the sum is greater than the parts, and we're looking to leverage momentum and strengths that we have on the team and take advantage of partnerships that are on our doorstep. So next. So to wrap up and leave you with some wilderness inspiration, the Glacier Wilderness was recommended by Congress, or recommended to Congress by President Nixon in 1974, but it still lacks congressional designation. Until the time that we can guarantee the highest protections for this landscape, we're mandated to preserve its wilderness character. So as we move forward as wilderness managers and supporters, it's important to remember that wilderness is a choice, that on a remarkable landscape, what's special is that we've drawn a line around this area and said that inside this line, we aren't the boss, but more like visitors and participants in a world around us. Wilderness is a resource. Wilderness areas and our experiences in them are important to keeping us human and to us understanding how we relate to the world. And then 3, wilderness is our legacy. We've inherited this resource of wilderness from those who came before us, and it's our obligation to pass it along so future generations can experience it as we do, so they can incorporate it into their understanding of their place in the world. Next slide. So we're going to take questions at the end, but my contact info is there in case anyone would like to get a hold of me. And I'd like to thank you for your time tonight.
Hey, thanks so much. That's awesome. And I'll probably wrap back with you in the question period about maybe giving us a definition of big W wilderness and little W wilderness. And also I think you pointed out, I think really well, kind of the long-term shift from individual projects to a longer scope of supporting structurally a program. And so I may come back to you about that, but thank you. That's exactly perfect. And really appreciate your putting that out there for us. And folks, feel free to put questions in the chat. Amy will curate those. And we've got a full hour with these three great experts. So let's take advantage of that as best we can. Next on deck here is one of my very favorite people and one of my very favorite projects in the park. Jean Tabert is the museum curator, and she is in charge of the many items related to the park's natural and cultural history that make up Glacier's diverse museum and archives collection. You know, I have a favorite artist, a guy named Boz Scaggs, way back in the day, and he has a lyric that really speaks to this, where he says, once a story's told, it can't grow old. And for me, that's what history is being able to have this sense of place that takes you back to a different time that didn't get old. So Jean's been around Glacier a long time. She is as innovative a person as I know in the park system. And Jean, thanks for spending some time and talking to us a little bit about, again, a very innovative structural project that we're very proud to be supporting this year.
Thank you, Doug. That's a very kind and generous introduction. As Doug said, my name is Jean Tabert. I've worked at Glacier National Park for several decades. I've been asked to give an overview of the museum, archives, and library programs here at the park, with a focus on some of our current projects. Our work centers around caring for and providing controlled access to the park's museum, archives, and library collection. While we don't have a conventional visitor-facing museum with displays, we do preserve and protect a collection of over 50,000 museum objects. This includes the full range of disciplines and object types, from cultural history to archaeology, biological specimens, geology, small amount of paleontology, and a very extensive archives of park records and photographs. These collections document the spectrum of the park's natural and cultural resources and are used by park staff and researchers to inform many projects. Next slide, please. Museum and archives collections require special care and trained staff. That topic is a whole presentation in and of itself, but in summary, this program works to meet Park Service and museum standards for care of and access to collections. This includes an array of record-keeping systems, so our collections are.
We may have lost you there for a minute, Jean. Okay. So maybe we'll, Jean, if you can hear us, we're not hearing you at the moment. Or is it just me who's not hearing Jean? Okay, all right. I am getting a little older and those things do pale.
I can try calling her.
Okay, let's or we could do a quick switch up, because we are nimble. I think we advertised that earlier. So maybe I'll introduce Lisa and Gabby, and if I get through the introduction, then we'll roll with that, and then come back to Jean if she can get back with us. So Lisa Bate and Gabby Eaton, the dynamic duo, as I like to call them, are really incredible. And you're going to learn about the vaccination of bats, which there's a very, very cool little video that features Gabby that we're going to put in the chat. You can't go to it now, but you got to copy it and go to it later. It's well worth 1 minute and 30 seconds of your time. Did we get Jean back? Not yet. Okay. So I'm going to just keep going. So Lisa is the veteran. She's been here in Glacier since 2009, and in 2022, I think the Daily Interlake called her the park's bird lady, which is a good thing. And the Jane Goodall of wool of birds, I'm going to say, including her for giving voice to the park's smaller creatures, and I think that's absolutely my experience of this super enthusiastic veteran of the Park Service in Glacier Park. We're so blessed to have Lisa in our world. And Gabby Eaton is a relative newcomer, began her NPS career here in Glacier as a conservation intern, then spent some time studying bats as a wildlife technician at the University of Wyoming, and then made her way back to Glacier in 2021 to team up with Lisa. And they're going to talk to us specifically tonight about bat research, but Lisa has led a lot of research that you've helped fund in the park, including harlequin ducks and black swifts and the keystone species, the Clark nutcracker. So don't limit your questions just to that, but we're super excited to again be funding some bat work in the park. And Lisa and Gabby, thanks for joining us, and I'll hand it off to you, and then we'll see if we can't grab Jean on the backside.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Oh, there are the slides. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to just give a brief overview of what we've accomplished thus far with the Glacier National Park Inventory Monitoring and Research Program. Next slide, please. It started in 2011. Prior to this time, we only knew about 4 bat species that was in our database, one of which was roadkill. But when I came to the park, I started learning of some of the risks that bats face. And there was a critical need to learn about what bat species we had throughout Glacier before we experienced potential massive losses of bats or even entire species. Next slide, please. So the most threatening risk was something called white nose syndrome. It was discovered in a cave in New York in 2006. White nose syndrome, it's so called. If you look at the little noses of the bats there, it's a fungus that grows on the noses of bats while they're hibernating by a cold-loving fungus called Pseudogymnoascus destructans, or PD. Next slide, please. It has spread so rapidly since 2006. It has killed millions of bats. We've lost, biologists no longer can estimate how many. In Georgia, we recently had a bat biologist come, and little brown bats are extirpated in Georgia. It's in 40 states and 8 Canadian provinces. The big concern here is that it's 2 counties away from Glacier right now. Next slide. One of the things that we have learned with a lot of support from the Glacier National Park Conservancy and their donors and the Park Service, we now know of 10 bat species in the park. So we've added 6 additional species to the mammals list. Next slide, please. We've done acoustic surveys throughout the park. This is a picture of a long-term acoustic detector at the Belly River Station. We have 2 in the park to monitor migration and hibernation patterns. Next slide, please. We also have done captures throughout the park, and compliance is a big part of our project. We have over 900 buildings in the park, and because many of these buildings are historic, they function like large bat houses. So before any reconstruction can be conducted on these buildings, we do inventory, we do bat emergence counts to find out if the building is being used by bats. And if it's a maternity roost, that means females with young, we develop mitigation plans that tell people when they can tear off the siding on the side of a building. Next slide, please. The little brown bat is the most common bat that we find in our buildings. They love our buildings. And they're also proposed to be listed as threatened under the endangered species list because of the impacts from white nose syndrome. So this is a main focus of our program. Next slide, please. And that's where the program switches to new research. And that's where I'm going to hand this off to Gabby Eaton.
Hi, I'm Gabby Eaton again, and I'm one of Lisa's wildlife technicians and soon to be a graduate student. I've been working here in Glacier for 5 seasons, and this evening I'm going to talk to you about some new research happening in the park. The last picture that was up there is our team right before swabbing bats for white nose syndrome in St. Mary. You can go to the next slide. So last fall, after I had expressed interest in pursuing grad school, Lisa and I started to formulate some ideas for a research project on bats in Glacier. You can go to the next one. Here in Glacier, we have over 900 historic buildings, with many of them providing spots for bats to roost, like the attic and loose siding shown in these pictures. We also have many bat boxes up in the park, and female little brown bats utilize these boxes and buildings during the maternity period, which is when they have their pups. After talking with experts from Montana and all around North America, as well as reading a lot of literature, it became really apparent that there was a need for research on bat boxes. Wildlife managers often recommend bat boxes as an alternative to bat roosts in buildings, but we don't really understand the specific conditions the boxes provide for bats. In some cases, researchers have discovered that boxes overheat in high temperatures and cause bats to die. Recent research has also shown that, especially in northern latitudes, buildings are considered essential habitat for female little brown bats and should be protected. But we can't always allow the buildings to function as giant bat boxes, especially if humans need to be in those same buildings. You can go to the next slide. So how can we understand more about the environment inside a bat box and also improve temperature stability in the boxes throughout the day? We decided to build 4 different bat box designs comparing temperatures throughout each. Two of the designs will be insulated using rigid foam and water pouches, and 2 will be regular boxes acting as controls. We will be building 40 bat boxes total, 10 of each design, and we will monitor the temperatures inside the boxes using eye buttons. And these are temperature sensors the size of a penny that will allow us to model what temperatures look like throughout the day in different parts of the boxes across all the different designs. We'll also have weather stations nearby to understand how the external weather impacts the internal temperatures. And the boxes will be placed at similar aspects and heights. Something super cool about this project is anything we learn will be useful because there's just such a lack of information on this. And in this picture, you can see insulation being added to a large bat box, and it was developed by Lisa's husband, Julian. He's been helping us in the carpentry aspect of this project. You can go to the next slide. In other really exciting news, Glacier National Park is now among some of the first places to test a new vaccine for white nose syndrome. Glacier is the first place in Montana to test the vaccine and the second to vaccinate bats for white nose syndrome preemptively. Tony Roque, pictured here giving the bat a vaccine, is an epidemiologist from Wisconsin who works for the National Wildlife Health Center of USGS. She came to vaccinate bats here in the park, and experts from Fish and Wildlife Service as well as other agencies came to see the efforts in action. You can go to the next slide. Here's the team that gathered to make this happen. We were able to capture 162 female little brown bats, and half were given the vaccine, half were given the placebo. This project will go on for another 2 summers, and our goal is to capture at least 150 bats each summer. Next slide. Here is Tony administering the vaccine. The vaccine is oral, so it just looks like the bats are getting a little drink. You can go to the next one. Along with the vaccine, the bats were banded. Each band has a unique ID and is placed on the bat's forearm. It doesn't impede the bat's ability to fly, and it doesn't harm the bat at all. This way, if we recapture the bat, we can read the band and see who it is. Next slide. The bats also received a passive integrated transponder tag, it's a mouthful, or just a PIT tag. These look like a microchip given to a dog or a cat, but they're obviously really small. They're inserted just under the skin on the back of the bat, and this allows us to track the survival of the vaccinated and unvaccinated bats over time. We'll place PIT tag readers up on the bat boxes where we trapped the bats, and these will record bats as they crawl over the sensors. We'll also use mobile PIT tag readers like these pictured to get a better understanding of the efficacy of this vaccine by tracking survival after white nose syndrome hits Glacier. And I'm going to pass it off to Lisa for the last two.
Next slide, please. I just want to thank all of our supporters and donors for all their help with this program since 2010. Next slide. And this program would not be happening without all the staff and volunteers that have helped also. And that's the end of our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's so awesome. Being an owner of a couple of bat boxes myself, that's really interesting to hear that. And I know that we'll no doubt have some questions to follow up after that. I understand that that Al Gore got quickly to work in repairing his interweb. And so that's terrific news for all of us who, Gene, you had us at hello, but we're really glad you're back.
Well, I am so sorry for that. I got dumped out of Zoom and then my computer completely froze. This is the second computer. This is the better one that I went and got from the office. So hopefully that wouldn't happen. And it did. So deep breath and I'll try to charge back in.
We just blame it on Bill Gates.
As I was saying, the museum work that we do is quite specialized. And, we're working on everything from making sure our collections are well documented, that the items are stored in appropriate storage environments, and that we are retaining the right things for posterity. We can't keep everything, so we need to be selective. Next slide, please. So this slide shows my current staff, which is wonderful. Sorry, I had a little bit of trouble on my end again. It takes a team and it takes some creative staffing and great partners to keep all of this work and our projects moving along. The Conservancy has generally supported this program for years, and including projects that fund staff that are listed in the blue text. Only my position and half of the library technician's time are paid for out of park-based funds. The rest is contingent on successful grant applications and support from partners and donors. And in this slide, you'll see the colors changed. The positions that are highlighted in green are supported through competitive National Park Service fund sources, and these staff all focus on archives. I'll touch on what archives processing is in just a minute. In addition to the museum and archives, we have a wonderful library, which offers research assistance to park staff and the public. And the library focuses on secondary source materials that include digital resource, published items, and other documents about the park. The resources we work with feed into a lot of the projects you're probably familiar with, such as the popular Headwaters podcast series, the recently published book about the history of the red buses, and then behind the scenes things like solicitors' findings about how a legal issue was interpreted in the past, and certainly an answer to many of the armchair historians or professional historians who contact us seeking information about a nuance about park history. With funding through the Conservancy for our annual Connecting to Park History project, I'm able to staff a seasonal museum technician who helps me with all of the nuts and bolts museum work and also assists with research requests during the busy summer season. The Connecting to Park History project also provides funds for the librarian who works on special projects in the winter when the library patronage drops. Without this funding, she would be furloughed. Between these two positions, we're able to provide excellent customer service and be responsive to research requests that come our way all year long. We're also working on a new project with a museum specialist who's focusing on updating our scope of collection statement and ensuring that we have proper documentation of all museum collections. In addition to care of collections and responding to research requests, we're working on a variety of special projects. With Glacier National Park Conservancy funding, we're an active contributor to the statewide Montana History Portal. This site is the primary way that we share images and records with the public. The platform also links our images and documents to those that are held at other repositories throughout the state. We add more content every year, and next slide, please. Before the holidays, we're going to add about 125 new photographs. We're excited to share some of the lesser known historical images. including a selection of photographs that document ranger activities from early park days through the 1970s. We selected the theme of ranger activities to illustrate how that role and its responsibilities have changed over time and to provide some fun visual reminders of the park of the past. We'll also be sharing images that illustrate how a visit to the park has changed over time and what remains similar. This is just a bit of an aside, but after we posted the photograph that you can see on the screen now on the Montana History Portal and on the park's social media feeds, we were contacted by one of the daughters of the singers who was able to tell us about her mother's history as a concessions employee. Next slide, please. There's some odd red lines showing up on that slide. Not sure what that is. Another Glacier National Park Conservancy funded project we're very excited about is digitizing and sharing content from over 100 reels of historic motion picture film. This film has long been part of the museum and library collections, but we haven't been able to view it for decades. If we were to project the aged and brittle film using an old school lamp projector, this would heat the film, put it under tension, and probably cause irreversible damage. So with Conservancy funding, we've been working with a commercial lab who's been digitizing the film. We have encountered some delays on this project, mostly on the part of the lab, but I'm pleased to share that they've just finished digitizing the collection. They've also rehoused the original film in archival containers, and they'll be stored long-term back at the park. Archival quality digital files will also be preserved. And with some of these films dating from the early 1930s, we'll soon have access to a time capsule of Glacier National Park's history. And here's a little bit of a sneak peek. There's no sound, but please, if you could play that video. So as you can see, there's some really fascinating glimpses into park history in this motion picture film project. This winter, we'll be working to describe and catalog the content of each film, and a Conservancy-funded employee will be working to edit selected clips, so the most interesting content can be shared on the park's website. Next slide, please. This is perhaps a bit less visually inspiring, but I've mentioned archives processing throughout the presentation, and I want to explain a little bit more about what that means and what the results are. In our world, archiving doesn't mean hitting the archive button on your email software. We're midway through a major effort to identify and process all of the inactive hard copy records that linger in park offices or that are in storage areas. So with Special Park Service funding, I have some very skilled archivists who take records from this current state, and these are all real world examples from the park, and they take these very disorganized records to a much better end state. So if you would go to the next slide, please. So this is the end state. After the records are appraised and the documents that need to be retained and preserved are identified, they're arranged in a logical order, they're rehoused in archival folders and boxes, and most importantly, they're described. The description makes the record contents easy to understand, so that once the records are processed, we can locate a specific document for a researcher through a keyword search. Without this type of work, we really would have no way of knowing a lot about the park's history. So the archivists create a careful organization and a hierarchy that's logical to researchers And every folder winds up being assigned a fixed and permanent location. It's placed within a box on a specific shelf at a designated place within the repository. So in conclusion, I just want to say we're very lucky to have these collections here at the park and be able to build on the work that past parks employees started. Without their efforts to save records and document the museum collections, many stories and images would be lost to time. We look forward to finishing these projects, and we'll continue to work on more ways to connect with park history. And most importantly, thank you for your interest, and thank you for your support of this and other Conservancy projects.
Wow, Gene, that's incredible, and actually brings back some memories of the piece you showed there that noted the 1997 visit of then Vice President Al Gore. I was actually working with Senator Baucus at the time and assisted on that trip, so it's a great memory for me. It's also cool to see the library and the book collection. 3 of the books that were on the shelf there, Black Faces, White Spaces, Voices of Rivers, and the Songs of Trees, were all featured in the Glacier Book Club, and I'm glad to report that next year, Ray Duff has agreed to allow us to feature as one of our 6 books for 2025, his new Glacier Reds book, and that wouldn't have happened without his being able to be in the archives. So thank you for that. I know Amy's got some questions in the chat already. Please feel free to just choose Amy Lucky in the chat there and put some additional questions. And with that, Amy, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay, awesome. Jean, since you were the last one to speak, I'm gonna start with you if that's okay. I have a couple of questions, and then I'm gonna move on to I think Kate will be next. So get ready, Kate. Jean, first of all, thumbs up, many thumbs up for the motion picture sample that you shared with us. That was super, super cool. Kathy Wyatt had a question. She wanted to know where the museum and archives is located in the park.
The Museum and Archives is located in West Glacier. We have a number of different storage facilities within the administrative headquarters of Glacier National Park. And we are open to researchers, but we do need folks to make an appointment with us just so we make sure that somebody's available to help.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And then this question is from Eric and Tanya. They always share such great questions with us. So I'll just read it. I have a question for Jean Tabbert. There are numerous Wynald Reese paintings of the Blackfeet in Lake McDonald Lodge. Are those all originals? And they said that they asked at the hotel and they didn't have any information on them. They wanted to make sure that they were being cared for since they were spread throughout the hotel. So yeah, they just want to know more about those.
So those paintings are not original. Those are reproductions. And it's my understanding that the Anschutz Corporation owns the originals and had those prints made and placed at the various concession facilities throughout the park. I have had conversations with our concessionaire partners about needing to have a little bit more information for folks at the front desk. Certainly, if those were the priceless originals, I would not sleep at night knowing they are hung in a manner where folks could walk right up and touch them.
Great. Thank you for that answer. And hopefully that makes Eric and Tanya feel better as well. Thanks, Eric and Tanya, for that question. I'm going to move on to Kate. Stacy had a question for Kate. Actually, sort of a 3-part question. I'll read all 3 parts, but if you need me to reread, that will be fine. What do you see as your biggest challenge? What's been your favorite moment in Glacier so far? And any favorite wildlife sightings? So biggest challenge, favorite moment, and favorite animal sighting.
So I'm going to go out of order because my favorite wildlife sighting was like an immediate, I knew immediately. At the end of September, I did a week-long backpacking patrol of the Continental Divide Trail. That's one of my topics of interest as far as wilderness management goes. And I was at Red Eagle Head Campground, and the sun was setting, and Red Eagle Head Lake was silver, and the biggest bull moose I've ever seen walked directly across the lake. And it was shocking because the lake has to maybe be like a foot deep. but it was just an immense animal, and the contrast of the moose against the silver lake was just like, it's burned into my memory. So that was a really special moment. And then I got my bear spray out and stood behind a tree to see where it was headed once it was coming my direction. Biggest challenge, there is a lot on my plate, and finding the right priorities at the right time and connecting the right people, I think, is the most challenging part of my position. So I'm looking forward to entering year 2, where I understand some of the people and some of the issues, and I make some of those pairings in a more effective way. And then my favorite moment. Oh, there have been so many. I I think most of them are tied to being out in the park. Pick a shining example. I think I really enjoy the feeling of sitting in a comprehensive river management plan meetings with my colleagues from Glacier and the Forest Service, sitting shoulder to shoulder with scientists and Forest Service land managers, and really working hard to come to a place of consensus and respect on a plan that's been 8 years in the making. We are beginning NEPA at some time this fall, winter, and I'm hopeful that that plan will come out and be effective in managing our Flathead Wild and Scenic River. And so I think that's the favorite moment, is the teamwork and the trust that we've had in those meetings, and also the trust that people have extended me as a newcomer.
Wow, what a great answer. I sort of need to know the end of the bull moose story. Did he walk right by you, or did you have to spray the bear spray?
No, he walked up the creek, which was perfect, away from the campground.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Lisa and Gabby with a couple of questions for you two. First, is rabies an issue with the bats?
No, not really. We've had I think I've only dealt with one case of rabies in the park since I've been here, and it was over in St. Mary. And one of our employees' sons was scratched by a bat, and they caught the bat and submitted it for rabies. And I really was unfamiliar with rabies and was thinking, oh, this is going to spread like wildfire because we have 3,000 bats that roost there. I contacted our park vet, Michelle Varant, and she's like, nah, rabies doesn't work that way. And she was totally right. For 2 weeks, we collected every bat carcass we found. None of them tested positive for rabies. It's very, very rare. Less than 1% of all the bats submitted for testing come back positive. It's far more common to have rabies in foxes, raccoons, and skunks.
Super interesting.
That being said, we're all vaccinated for rabies because it is a serious disease. And if you have a bat on the ground, put leather gloves on, take it outside, put it on a tree, leaning, rough bark, and let it go up.
Good to know. So next question is, it seems almost impossible to be able to handle these little guys and gals without hurting them and tagging them and all of that. So can you speak to what it's like to handle them?
Do you want to do that, Gabby?
Yeah, sure. Well, they're pretty tough, I would say. Like when I first started handling bats, I was worried that I was gonna hurt them. But I mean, if you're gentle, never had any issues with them. But they do squirm around a lot and they bite you and they make noises the entire time. So that's usually pretty exciting, at least for me. I don't think they're having a great time. But yeah, most of the work that we do with them, we're not hurting them. I would say the only thing that probably doesn't feel great is the pit tagging. And obviously, like, that's something that we know.
Right. Nice. Okay, I think I'm gonna send it back over to Doug. I think I have a couple of others buried in here, so I'm gonna look through my chat a little bit, but I know Doug has a couple of questions as well.
Yeah, great. No, I appreciate that. And we'll go back to Kate. I do want to follow up, Kate, on Big W Wilderness and Little W Wilderness. That Montana is one of the states that does not have kind of a Big W wilderness designation, including Glacier Park not being officially designated as wilderness, but is operated by wilderness. Can you give us a little bit of a primer about Big W Wilderness and Little W Wilderness?
Sure, that's a great question. So wilderness has various stages of designation. In 1964, when the Wilderness Act passed, all wildlands were mandated to be assessed for wilderness designation, capital W wilderness designation. And as those parcels of land got assessed, depending on if they met those qualities of wilderness character, they would move farther in the process. And so ultimately, to be protected as federal capital W wilderness, Congress has to pass a law that designates that wilderness area. So where glaciers, and so Bob Marshall Wilderness is designated. It's an interesting contrast as Glacier's neighbor and part of the Crown of the Continent ecosystem, because they have full federal designation. Glacier Wilderness was recommended to Congress for that designation by Nixon, and Congress never signed the law designating it. So there's a number of different Western parks, especially in the Intermountain region, that are held up near or at that point in the process as well. And so National Park Service policy says that we are mandated to preserve wilderness character in the glacier wilderness and not to let it degrade until the time that it's ready to be designated. And so because it wasn't enacted into law in 1974 doesn't mean it's over. It means that the Park Service needs to maintain readiness in case the climate was right to pursue that formal designation. And what the formal designation gives it is protection by law instead of protection by policy. And it's the highest level of protection you can give a public landscape.
But I think that's really, incredibly great answer. Really, really clearly put. I think that difference between policy and law really can be significant depending on where we are in the landscape of time and politics. So appreciate that. I have one more question. I know Amy's got some questions both for you and for Jean. But you mentioned the river and the partnership. Glacier's boundary happens to be a couple of rivers, right? And so you may have a policy on camping and permitting in Glacier National Park that 45 feet away across the river is different. Talk to us a little about that challenge.
Doug, that has been one of my favorite topics to work on since I got here. So I work in law enforcement, and part of my goal in law enforcement is to develop community policing initiatives and to make really clear rules and resource reasons for them so that people are compelled to follow the rule, not just because it exists, but because it's the right thing to do. So what I've been working on since I got here was a consistent set of regulations between the Forest Service and the Park Service. And so we are pretty far down the line of proposing those in tandem. And it's taken a long time to sit together to say, we want camping to look the same. We want fires to look the same. We want human waste management to look the same. We want fishing to look the same, because the river is a watershed and it's an ecosystem. And the boundary, no matter where it is, the center of the channel, high water mark, doesn't matter. It's all part of the same ecosystem. So I'm really excited about the plan, because I think that we'll have way better resource protection because there'll be good public understanding of what the rules are and why they exist.
As the great George Papard said, I love it when a plan comes together.
Keep your fingers crossed. We're almost there.
There we go. Amy Lucky, you've got some more questions, I know, and let's keep Kate right where she is, because we've got another question for her, and then I think you have some for Jean.
Yes. Yeah, let's stick with Kate. Renee Fredrickson says, "Hi, Kate. Wow, wilderness. Such great work. Thank you. I'm wondering if the wilderness ranger positions you mentioned have park funding, or are the wilderness rangers dependent on conservancy funding for their jobs?"
Yeah, that's a great question. So the classic wilderness rangers, we've got lead rangers and rangers that, so we've got two kinds of wilderness rangers, but the ones that patrol trails, clean toilets, open campgrounds, check permits, those are all funded by the Conservancy, and they have been for a number of years. There are a number of other positions that are funded by park-based dollars. And I want to point out too that we have a wilderness data steward that's funded by a 2022 Conservancy grant. So we've been stretching that money and keeping that person on the rolls. It's not a wilderness ranger, but it's also a Conservancy funded position. We do not have additional funding sources outside of park-based funding and Conservancy dollars.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. Mm-hmm. And I think I have 3 questions for Jean, 3 or 4. I love this one.
I will do my best.
Yes, leave it to Carl and Candy, longtime supporters and great participants in our virtual series. They wanted to know, what is the most valued item in the museum collection? And I kind of have a follow-up, is if you have a favorite item that you just think is the coolest thing.
That's a really hard question to answer. By policy, we do not have appraisals or values on our items. And I very much think that the value of items is in the eye of the beholder. I think some of my personal favorite items are the ranger station logbooks and the fire lookout diaries that give the personal touch to an experience in the park. And I also would say that my favorite item probably changes at least every month, depending on what I'm working on. One of the fun things about my job is I get to help folks address all sorts of questions. And so I get to take these fun little deep dives into nuances of park history. Probably my favorite photograph is the image that I think most of you have seen on Montana History Portal or elsewhere of the early settlers on Lake McDonald who have the wives wanted posted on the side of their cabin. And several of them are holding cats, which just makes them even more wonderful humans in my mind.
Oh gosh, so interesting. Yes, I bet you do take some deep dives that just keep going and going, little rabbit holes you go down. Thanks for that question, Carl and Candy. Let's see. This is a great question from Jordan Leffler. He's a fabulous photographer and supporter of the Conservancy. Thanks for being here tonight, Jordan. Where do many of the photos and video reels come from? Are they donated or are they found in other libraries?
So I'll speak first about our still photograph collection. Our photographs come from a whole variety of sources. A lot of them are donated by people who may have photo albums that their relatives took or compiled when they visited the park. We certainly are lucky enough to receive a lot of these donations when people are trying to figure out what to do with family possessions. The park also received a huge donation of historical photographs from the Burlington Northern Railway. They were the successor corporation after the Great Northern Railway. And when they took over, they gave the park many, many, many Great Northern Railway related images. So a lot of our images by T.J. Heilman and Fred Kaiser and a lot of the big names of early park photographers were part of that donation from the Burlington Northern. Those photographers were all commissioned by the Great Northern Railway to come to the park, take images, show folks what an experience in the park would be like. So we were lucky enough to receive those. And certainly there have been a lot of Park Service photographers over the decades who have, left their work when they retired. As far as the motion picture film, it is a range, and not all of it is super well documented. We're hoping that when we have time to sit down and view it all, now that we have access to it, we might be able to figure out more about where it came from. In some instances, we just have very sort of sloppy labels on the film canisters. In other situations, they are commercial films, either contracted for by the Great Northern or, created to publicize the park. Some of them definitely have a home movie type feel. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what we can figure out about where they came from. Some of them were probably also Park Service produced, but we don't have great records about it. So that's part of the fun discovery that we'll be working on.
Wow, thank you for that. Super interesting. Yeah, lots of fun discoveries, I bet, in your line of work. So
Yes.
one more, you mentioned the logbooks at the ranger stations and fire lookouts. Virgil wanted to know, are any logbooks retained from the top of mountains, specifically Reynolds?
So climbers' registers are turned into the archives. I do not know off the top of my head what we have from Reynolds, but if maybe Gracie could put my email in the chat, I can certainly check the museum catalog. Often those climbers' registers come to us in terrible shape. They can be very hard to read. They can be waterlogged, but we do our best to make sure that they will be preserved for time.
I would note that it's probably not readable as the background for Jean, but in the logbook Numa Ridge, if my memory serves, Edward Abbey would be one of the authors in that logbook, which I think is pretty cool.
Edward Abbey did serve as a fire lookout at Glacier National Park. Interestingly, his logbook was stolen from the park and then returned to the park. Also, interestingly, I don't think he had a very good experience in Glacier. His writing is not what one might expect it to be. And actually, his wife completed a lot of the entries, including the weather recordings and other mandatory. So, I don't want to read too much between the lines, but people come in to look at the photocopy that we have of that book. We try not to use the original, and they're often a little disappointed because it's not quite as evocative as one would think it would be. But I do like the fact that it was stolen and returned.
I think that's a great story. Thank you guys very much. This is, I think, evidence, if you needed any more, that magic happens in the hands of the people who wear green and gray in Glacier National Park. Magic. That these people are great leaders, but they're also the tip of the iceberg, that they have colleagues throughout the park in many different disciplines who we're very pleased to be able to support with your contributions to do incredible work that helps preserve this place for future generations. So I want to thank Gabby and Lisa and Kate and Jean for your time tonight, but more than that, for the time that you put in. Keep in mind that when they ask for a grant to do a project, they're asking to do more work, right? So I mean, think about that. I say that with all importance because they're saying, I want to do this project. It's important, and I want to do more work. And that really is public service at its highest and best. So thank you for that. And for the many, many people who've joined us tonight, thank you for joining us. And I hope that this has been an enjoyable hour. For you, it sure has been for me. And I promise, Jean, that I won't drive immediately to the park to try and look at the movie. But it will take some great restraint on my part. And again, thanks everybody for all that you do. It would not be possible without the supporters to the Conservancy and the amazing team and teamwork that we have here in our shop and with our partners in the park. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your rest of your night, and we'll look forward to some of this continuing great fall weather. Good night, everybody.